Hi, this is Greg. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. If you guys want to go ahead and start typing any topics that you want covered, we'll make sure that the audio is functioning here. So for those of you that are watching after the live broadcast, we'll wait a couple minutes to start collecting everyone's questions. So if you want to go ahead and kind of forward maybe 5 or 10 minutes by the time we kind of collect everyone's questions, we'll go get started. If anyone wants to kind of keep a little notation of the topics and questions that we go over and they want to send it to me afterwards, I'd be happy to post that so people could jump to very specific points in a discussion. So that might be helpful. All right. So we're seeing some people. All right. So from Washington, Kutztown, Pennsylvania. I have cousins that live in Reading, so not too far. So I see Robert from Florida, Jonathan from Wyoming, and Don from Kansas. So if you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in. We have a list of questions that people had sent in advance, so we have about maybe 10 or so questions, but any topics that you want covered tonight, we just kind of really want to go over topics that you want covered so that we could go over everything that you want to see. So if you have a particular question, don't understand something, and it's not only just on Cubase, but on any Steinberg related product as well. So, all right, so seeing some more people logging in. All right, you see Matthias from Kent, Ohio. All right. Yeah, last time we had people from Portugal or up at 4 in the morning watching, so that's kind of interesting. All right, we'll see if we have some more people logging on. Again, if you have questions, we had some people that sent some topics in advance. Can you guys hear me okay on the stream? There's a little bit of a delay, so from when you hear me to from when I talk to when you hear me could be up to like 30 seconds. Respond immediately. There's a bit of latency there. All right, Jimmy, good to see you there. If you haven't really checked out, it's a great Facebook group called the Cubase Academy that Jimmy runs. Based in Atlanta. Good to see you online. So if you want to go check out the Cubase Academy, there's all sorts of great tips and tricks you can learn there and cool plugins that work with your Cubase. All right, you see Richard from Las Vegas. All right. See some more people logging in. All right, so glad you guys can hear me. Sometimes the audio doesn't work in the Google Hangout so well, and then we have to kind of scramble a bit. But glad it's kind of working tonight. All right, Graham from the UK. All right, so it's up late for you. So, and again, if you have questions, topics you want covered, I'll read some of the topics that people had sent in previously. So we had a question on metering. Let me dig up my list here. Hang on. Question on kind of undo history about monitoring guitar effects on the UR series, and tracking with plugins on the input channel of the UR. How to set up Q mixes for different hardware and setting up Q mixes for performers. How to put effects just on a control room outputs that don't necessarily affect the mix bus. Using quick controls. Also an automation question and about some routing of virtual instruments. So we'll take a quick look here, see if more questions are sneaking in. So once again, if you have some questions or topics you wanted to go over tonight, feel free to kind of enter them in the chat field on the right-hand side. If not, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. And as we do this, if you have a question on anything that I kind of go over, if it goes by fast and you want me to slow down, we could do that. Or if you're not quite understanding a particular aspect of what we're showing, please feel free to just kind of chime in on the, to chime in directly in the comments field. All right, so someone from Honolulu, that's great. I got to do clinics out there a couple years ago at Easy Music, really great guys. So I see Michael from Honolulu. I think I'm pronouncing it right. So I'm reading James Michener's Hawaii as we speak. So learning all about Hawaii. So great to see people from all over the country, all over the world. And once again, if you have topics you want covered, please feel free to go ahead and ask in advance. Or you could always send them to me in the comments field. We could go over Groove Agent 4 if that's what you want to see. So any things that you wanted to go over, we could go over Groove Agent 4. We've kind of done it in a couple of the past Google Hangouts, so some people you may not want to see it all in depth again, but we'll definitely go over that. Is there any particular aspects done on Groove Agent 4 that you want to see? We could kind of do an overview of it as well. But once again, pretty much anything is fair game. Anything that you want to see in action, just let us know. But we'll go over Groove Agent 4. Greg, good to see you back from Portland. It's a beautiful city. All right. So once again, if you have topics you want covered, please feel free to go ahead and enter them in. We'll go over Groove Agent 4 for Don. He wants to see that tonight. And we'll get started in just about 1 minute. All right, so we'll get started here in just about a minute. Let's see if you have any other questions. And again, as we kind of go through the discussions tonight, please feel free to ask questions and kind of just enter them in the comments field. I'll try to circle back and catch them when I can. But if I miss one, just feel free to kind of ask again as we're going through the Hangout tonight. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So our first question came about metering in Cubase. So if we wanted to, and again, if anyone wants to kind of take notes as we go along and send them to me, I sometimes don't have enough time to go back and kind of catalog the different notes. Okay, so I see also about question. Okay, so we see Groove Agent 4. I'm also seeing a question on mono to stereo, so we'll go over that for Greg. All right, so we're going to go over the first question that we had. To actually just kind of do about the loudness metering inside of Cubase 7, and it was a question about kind of getting a good grasp of what the loudness metering was doing. I think it's kind of pretty similar, and there's the question it asked about differences from Cubase 7 to 7.5, and so the question was easy to understand about finding the RMS level and subtracting it from the true peak to get the average dynamic range. So when we go into the metering, the control room has a tremendous amount of metering. So if you open up the mix console here, you could actually, and we do that by going to your devices, to device menu here, to the mix console, or hit F3. It's a great shortcut. And if you activate the control room may not be active by default. So you may have to just simply, one of the great things is with Cubase 7, the control room is integrated in with the mixer, which made a lot of sense. But if you click in the upper left-hand corner here, we could actually see the little setup window. And we could actually check to have the control room meter, and that will generally show up on the right-hand side. You could also go to your devices, and if you wanted to have your control room mixer here, that could be kind of independent of the window, or if you wanted to be able to see kind of different options, you could have this control room and this control room open simultaneously. The control room is really ideal for doing different headphone mixes, or switching between different monitors or down mix presets. So you could do a tremendous amount, but it also has a tremendous amount of metering. So if you actually click in the upper, you'll see two tabs in the upper section of the control room, and then you have two tabs in the bottom section of the control room. So if I play my mix here, we could actually look at our metering, and we have kind of a lot of different metering types. So you could say we wanted to see full digital scale, DIN scale, EBU scale, the European Broadcast Union, British scale, Nordic scale. We have K20, K14, K12, so the CATS metering systems as well. And you could also kind of set, depending on your metering, where your room is calibrated to as well here, depending on the metering scale itself. So a lot of people are kind of used to digital scale, and here we could actually kind of see our RMS and our peak indicated right here. So if I kind of play back a project, and we'll go through some of the different digital meters here. So as we do this, I can say, okay, let's look at our DIN scale, and a lot of these will be kind of at different points. These options will show you kind of different color schemes at different dB values or LU values. So Nordic scale, CAT system 20, 14, or 12. Now, something that was added that's really handy inside of, I believe it was with 7.52, was one of the things that I wanted to be able to do is to kind of see my metering and the big kind of Homer Simpson obvious control room knob. So if you click on the CR here, you could have kind of your meter kind of shortened a little bit, but you can now control the actual monitoring volume directly here. So these will kind of show you all the different metering scales, and these are, standard within Cubase. You don't have to buy like a super expensive version or kind of a teaser version. These are all included, but there's also kind of a new standard that started with the EBU, and it's a R128 scale. And this is kind of a new standard for broadcast, where we would hear a significant difference in the volume between different tracks, and the volume between like commercials and the program material, because often they would kind of have a difference in loudness versus what the RMS or kind of the average level was, or what the peak level was. So if we come here to the loudness meter, so you click here on the loudness tab, we can actually now kind of see all of the range, the true peak, the momentary maximum, and all these kind of loudness controls, so you could know if you're mixed. So if I was doing this for a broadcast, I would want to have my master fader down. And this is now called, instead of a dB or a VU, an LU, a loudness unit. So this is kind of where you'd want, and ideally the ideal range is at -23 LU. But at that point, -23 LU in this scale is 0. So if you wanted to kind of see all the different, the range, the true peak, the integrated loudness, the momentary maximum, short-term loudness. You could see this all directly here within the loudness meter itself. So it's really ideal if you're composing music that's going to be broadcast, where you could have your program material not compressed so much at the final stage. So we can, and one of the great things about that is a lot of people do a mix that's really hot and then it gets compressed and it kind of loses a lot of the flavor of the original mix. Or if it's not hot enough at that point, they may try to expand it to kind of get it to the ideal broadcast level. So now there's really fairly comprehensive metering directly inside of the control room in Cubase. All right, the next question that we had was about being able to save, just make sure I read the question correctly, about saving the undo levels within a project. So as we go around and actually kind of move particular and do edits on our project window here, if I move a piece or slip a piece or adjust my volume here or do a fade out, etc., or just move entire sections of audio. I would say I want that there, I want this here. There's always going to be kind of an edit history, and this will be a linear edit history. So if we go here to your edit menu, we can go directly to your edit history, and now you could actually just kind of scroll back through times, or you could hit Control or Command Z or Control Command Shift Z for redo. So you have unlimited levels of undo and redo until you close the project. Now, sometimes people may want to have processing that sticks around. So if you want it to be more permanent, we could do offline processing. This is something that's not in the lighter versions of Cubase. But what you're able to do is to come right over here. And if I grab, let's say if I want to do some offline processing, I'll take just this bass part here. So I'm going to select a range of that with my range selection tool right here. And then I could right click, and I like to personally have the extended toolbox. By default, Cubase often has kind of a smaller toolbox, and if you hold down the control key, you can toggle that behavior, or you could actually kind of just set a preference under your tools to where I prefer this, where I can see my context-sensitive menu option. So if I wanted to do some processing on my audio, and many times in a lot of programs this would be considered kind of destructive editing. So let's say if I wanted to fade out this clip here, and maybe I wanted to reverse the audio. So again, I could just select the range here, and at this point, if I wanted to reverse the bass, and now our fade in turns into, or fade out turns into a fade in. But we could also kind of process it through plugins. So at this point, if I say, okay, let's just add a delay to the bass track, and let's run a, so just right click and let's do a really obvious plugin, as if the delay is probably pretty obvious. But let's say if I want to go to like a ring modulator. So now if I play this bass part, and if I want it, and even after I saved or handed it off to someone, at this point, we could select that clip. And if you go to audio, you could go to offline process history. And we'll just kind of change the size of this window just a little bit here. So we'll go to my offline process history again. So we'll go audio to offline process history, and I'm going to select the clip this time, and this way it knows where to look for our offline process history. So at this point, I'm going to say let's remove the reverse. So at this point, I could just choose to remove one edit, so even within a range of edits. So if I just wanted to come here, I could say let's just remove the reverse. So even after saving, I could now kind of come back here and remove one edit non-sequentially. So if I want to, we hear a delay kind of kick in there. So again, so even after saving, so you may find yourself wanting to do particular types of projects where or types of edits where you say, okay, I just didn't want that to do a fade out. And you could do these types of edits that could be undone at any time in the project life cycle unless you specifically have frozen the edits. So while the traditional edit history will remain until you actually close the project, the offline process history will live beyond that. I see a comment from Don about the previous Club Cubase meetings and the sessions. Yeah, they're all available right here on the youtube.com/clubcubase, so you can go back and review them. I think we started in February of this year. Plus, there's another 55 minutes of pretty in-depth tutorials on Groove Agent 4, but we could touch on it if we have time as well. We'll try to get to that. All right, so our next question that we had is someone with a Steinberg UR, the USB 2.0 interface, that wanted to have the guitar effects, but not during the recording process. So they wanted to monitor the effects, but not actually record those effects. So if you have a UR44 or UR28M or UR824, those have onboard DSP. So you can think of it almost like a little digital mixer, if you will. And what's the benefit of the onboard DSP is that it has really imperceptible latency for processing real-time audio. So I'm going to come over here, go to my VST connections, and let's just say I'll do something really simple, like just a stereo input, and I'm going to just add a bus here. And then we're going to assign this to one of our inputs. I have a UR44 that I'm currently using for the Google Hangout tonight. So as soon as I do that, and that's been assigned, we could go into our mixer. And sometimes some of the projects may, by default, hide the input channels. So if I click here, I could actually say, okay, let's go, and you could choose to view the input channels. And generally the input channels, kind of like on a classic split console design, will actually just kind of be on the left-hand side of the console. Now, as soon as we have these assigned to the inputs of the UR audio interface, you may want to come over here to the racks. And a lot of times this will show up automatically once it's assigned. And make sure that the hardware within the racks is visible. So if I come right over here, I could now choose my hardware. Now, and what we see is a basic kind of signal flow here. So I can see my input. I could have, I could apply a high-pass filter. I could reverse the polarity or the phase of the input. But if I click here, we see this little line. So what this is going to enable us to do is we have two different settings, and it can be a little subtle to see. So if I kind of look at this, our signal is basically bypassing this insert and then going to the input channel, which is routed to a particular channel. If I move this line down to the middle position, what we could do now is to choose to monitor this particular effect. So what's kind of key about this, and another distinction, is if I wanted to actually record with the effect on, I can move this line to the bottom position, and we kind of see the signal flow go through the effect, whereas here it's being processed with the effect, but the actual signal flow is bypassing that. So in this mode, we're monitoring the effects, and in this mode, we're actually applying or printing the effects on input. So if I wanted to have just a guitar part, and sometimes, especially with guitars, you want that to, that could really affect performance of different musicians. So at this point, we could record a dry guitar signal, but monitor through, let's say, our lead guitar amp. And if we click on the edit button, we can see all the channels. Now, if I find that you just love that particular sound and you want to print it, just simply move this line down, and now you can have that guitar amp signal recorded. So you can choose to monitor or to actually apply. So with the onboard DSP as inserts, you could have 4 different guitar amps. So you have a clean, a crunch, a lead, and a drive. And there's also what's called a channel strip, and this is a morphing channel strip. So what's kind of interesting about this is you could actually have dynamics and EQ, and why it's called the morphing channel strip is you could actually just kind of apply optimum settings here. So you could kind of morph where the dynamics and EQ are kind of intrinsically linked for kind of, optimized presets. So you could actually say, okay, I just want these two to interact musically together. So if I wanted this to, like be a kind of a smiley face EQ, or to be able to adjust your different parameters, or I want more mid-range, that you could do that. Now also, there's built-in reverb, and a reverb is selected where you could monitor the reverb only. So if I wanted to, I could actually just come here and have my Rev X reverb. And Yamaha's been doing reverbs, for 20, 30 years now, or I guess over 30 years, digital reverb. So they've been doing it for a long time. And this is a really fabulous reverb. So you have these that are powered on the input side with imperceptible latency. So you can monitor or track. And again, it's just this little line right here. So in the center is monitoring, and the bottom is tracking through those DSP effects. And now you could also come here and you have your send level for the reverb. But these also show up, these same effects show up as regular VST plugins as well. So at that point, you could use them throughout your mix, but you could use the ones that are powered by the UR interface itself to actually have the imperceptible latency, which really aids in tracking. So it's a really, really great integration of that. All right, so while we're here, I see a question from Greg about separating, the headphone 1 and headphone 2. So when you kind of come over here, to see if we go to our VST connections, and once we kind of, but you could also come right here to your audio hardware setup, which is an additional function that comes right here in your audio hardware setup. So at this point, you could have, if you have a different Q mix, so let's say here I have a Q mix for vocals and guitars, and I wanted those 2 different Q mixes to go out of the different headphones. We can now just kind of come here and choose the different Q mixes directly here. So usually phones 1 will default to mix 1, and then if you wanted to have the same mix here on headphone 2, or you could have this do your second mix, and you could also choose how much of the reverb is being routed directly into each of the headphones. So if you wanted the singer to have more reverb in their headphones than the guitar player, you could adjust the amount of reverb in the headphones. But again, if you go to your devices, to audio hardware setup, you could choose your different Q mixes here directly from your control room, and also have different amounts of effects directly into your different headphone cues. So hope that makes sense. All right, we'll move on to next question. All right, and this is a little bit related to kind of what we're doing is, the next question was how to track with plugins on the input channel. So if I come here, so if you have the UR interface, you may actually run into some plugins. You have the onboard DSP here, but on the interface itself, on the input channels, if you just choose an insert, we can now choose any plugin that you want here. So if I say, okay, I wanted a compressor, we can now actually have a compressor on the input stage. So we could actually track and record through the compressor. Now the warning is that some plugins will take time to actually process, the software plugins, and that's why we have kind of assisted DSP, especially on kind of the critical stage of tracking. But we are seeing some plugins like the Rupert Neve Portico plugins are actually zero latency. I'm not sure how they did that. But you could actually put those on your input channel, and it's not going to impose any latency. So when I talk about latency, if you haven't really done it, you could put like a big multi-band compressor. They're often kind of very high latencies. This would, as you're tracking, add a little bit of a delay, and depending on each plugin could have different amounts of latency. But you can just simply have normal plugins here on the input stage if you wanted to apply those during the recording process. But depending on the plugin and the latency that it does impose, it might actually be a little offsetting for the performer or voiceover artist to do that. All right, so we'll move on to next question. Let me just switch over to my document here. Okay, so the next question was setting up cue mixes. And again, this is kind of done through the control room. And if you haven't really done this or experienced setting up cue mixes, and these are kind of the individual headphone mixes that the musicians want to hear. So when you're tracking, you may actually hear some different mixes where maybe each musician wants to hear themselves a little bit louder. It's often called a more me headphone mix. So as we kind of work with this, one of the things that we want to do is to be able to set this up so that the mix that you hear in the control room and the mix that you're kind of building, and it's pretty common to start building these kind of as you're tracking and doing the project. Whereas, in traditional studios, with analog tape and large format consoles, you may kind of have a tracking mode, a mixing mode, an editing mode that were all very distinct. And as we're kind of working in a computer, those modes are really merged. So people are actually, basically doing a lot of mixing during the tracking and editing process. But to actually have dedicated headphone mixes is something that a lot of programs don't offer a great functionality to do. So in our racks, we first want to make sure that the cues are activated. So we'll come over here to our cue mixes, and we'll see our cues set up directly here. Now, as I see my cues, what we're able to do is, and this is going to be, we see names carried over here. So in this example, I have vocals, guitar, bass, and drums. So if I wanted to go into my VST connections, first thing you want to do is go to the Studio tab. And this is kind of all the different settings for the control room. So here we could have like a talkback. So if you have a microphone that you wanted to communicate with the other musicians, you could connect it to an audio input directly on your audio interface. Now, the control room uses available inputs and outputs of your audio interface. So if you have a 2-in, 2-output interface, that doesn't give you a lot of flexibility for separately bussing out different mixes to people. So if you have like a UR audio interface, that will give you 2 distinct headphone outputs. But you could also, take additional line level outputs and feed that into any headphone amplifier. So within Cubase, we could have 4 different cue mixes. Previous versions to 7 used to call it studios. It was just a really kind of a confusing term. But now I'll go ahead and just remove this. So I'll delete this cue mix. So we have vocals, guitars, and I'm just going to remove my drum cue mix so we can show how to set this up. So when I right-click, we can add up to 4 different cue mixes. So we can have one cue mix here, and you can just call it whatever you want. So we'll call it vocals, guitars, bass, and we'll call this one drums. And I won't capitalize everything here. Sorry about that. And what I want to do is to choose what available output this is being sent to. So again, we need a physical connection on the actual, so we're going to need a physical connection on your audio interface for this to happen. So we choose and have our outputs here. So if I wanted 4 separate headphone mixes, I might have to have 8 outputs and feeding into different headphone amplifier systems. Now once I come here, I could see my vocal mix, my guitars, bass, and drums. And as you kind of hover over, you could actually kind of see different things kind of, become more apparent or translucent. In the control room section here, we want to start off with, let's say, our mix. So we listen to this. So if we have a mix hanging, like started up here, and I wanted to send different settings to my different musicians, first thing I want to do is select all my channels. So I'll come here in my channel selector zone, and I'll just hold down the shift key. So I'm going to select the top mix here, select the bottom channel, but before I select the bottom channel, we're going to hold down the shift key, and this will select all of my channels. And I'm going to activate the quick link, and this is like a temporary link right here. So as we do this, we see our quick link. So now as I move something, it's going to kind of be applied to every channel. So I'm going to go to my control room and right click. So just kind of in our different control room. So I'll just come right here, right click, and I'll say all cues. And what I want to do is to activate the cue sends across all 69 channels. I turn them all on. Right click one more time, and we'll say we're going to use the current mix levels. And this is what it's going to do is kind of replicate the volume levels of each of the channels here. And it's going to apply that and mimic that across all the different channels here. And this could take a second or two. All right, so that's done. And we also want to mimic the pan settings. So again, right click, use current pan settings, assign. So now, if I wanted to toggle back and forth between my different cue mixes, we could actually click right here. So I can say, okay, we're going to listen to cue mix 1, cue mix 2, 3, and 4. But if I wanted to kind of now build my actual mix, I'm going to select all my drums here. And of course, the drummer wants to hear more of themselves. So I'll just come right here. I'll take the drums channels, and we're going to boost the drums in the drummer's headphone mix. The bass, we'll take our bass and boost the bass player's headphone mix. So when I adjust this here, this is sending more of this channel into the drum headphone mix. When I adjust my bass here, I can send more bass into the bass player's headphone mix. And let's go ahead and select our guitars here. So now we can slide over here, and we'll say we need more guitars in the guitar player's headphone mix. Now, as I do this, I could now play. And if I wanted to listen to what the drummer's headphone mix sounded like in the control room, or what the bass player's headphone mix is, what the guitar player's headphone mix is, so really easy dialed in. Now, something else that's really can be problematic during a tracking session is that, not everyone, during a live take wants to hear, for instance, a click track if you're using a click track. And often, if you have like a vocal mix, you may not want to have the vocalist have the click track, because often the click track can just bleed through bleed through the headphones and be picked up by the microphone. So if you click on the vocals here, you can now actually just say, okay, we want to bypass the metronome. But maybe the drummer wants the metronome, and then the drummer wants the metronome very loudly. So at this point, you could actually have, you could switch the drummer to listen to the control room mix. If you have an external input, like, something like your iPad hooked up and you want to just play music back, or you want to listen to their individual cue mix, we could just do all of this right here. Now, if I go to the setup, you could also have different effects on each of the cue mixes. So once again, if you click in the lower right-hand corner, each cue mix could have their own individual effects as well. So it comes in really handy. So, in just a matter of a couple of seconds, within 30 seconds, you could build up a really quick cue mix and actually store it and save it with the project. So again, that's hardware independent. You just may need multiple outputs. And we could have, again, up to 4 stereo cue mixes in addition to the control room mix. So you could feed it out to 5 musicians pretty easily. So hopefully that makes sense. But it's a very cool, powerful feature for that. Now, we also had another question on a control room about being able to have effects in the control room and be able to listen to them, but not applied to the actual audio signal itself, like when we exported an audio mixdown. So the control room also has monitor control. So if I wanted to, I could come over here and, again, using available inputs and outputs of my audio interface. So I'm just going to come here. And if we go to the upper right-hand corner, you can open up your VST connections window, or just hit F4 is the keyboard shortcut. So here I could have 4 distinct monitors. And again, I just choose what inputs and outputs are being used for each of those. So if I have like a Genelec system in 5.1, or Yamaha, or an Artone, or a Focal system, I could have 4 different monitor systems. So if I wanted to switch between different monitors, I could just simply come right here and you could just switch between your different monitors. So if you say, okay, I want to listen to it on the Genelecs, or let's listen to it on the Yamaha, or now the Artone or the Focal, you can just switch between these different monitors. Now, sometimes you may notice that whatever monitor is louder sounds better to our ears. So you may want to be careful that when you switch monitors that you want to have consistent volume and monitoring levels. So if I have the monitors selected here, if we go to the setup, anytime that I have a particular monitor selected, so say I go to monitor A, at this point I could have an individual gain control for each monitor. Now the question was, how do we use different types of effects? So each of these can also have different, if you want to have like a room correction plugin or a compressor, you could just kind of come here and have, this is one of the VCM compressors, and then as you switch between your different monitors, you could have different plugins. So if you wanted to EQ or do room correction, you could just have these, and these will just be on playback and not actually go through kind of the mix engine when you're actually choosing to export your files. So so if you wanted to have your 4 different monitors, and these could be, mono up through 5.1 in Cubase, or I think you could do 13.2 in Nuendo, you can now switch all your different monitoring sources here, have individual effects and individual volume control. So if you don't see the volume control here, once you kind of switch over to the setup from the mixer, just simply use your mouse scroll wheel and you can kind of navigate just that easily. So that's an easy way to have plugins just on your monitoring chain that don't really tie directly into your exported audio mixdown. All right, I see a quick question on about using chord tracks. Okay, so I'm just going to cycle back here. A couple of questions have come in. Chris had asked about, can you use any VST with a chord track? You can use any MIDI device, any VST instrument with a chord track. So yeah, it doesn't have to be included. You can use any anywhere that MIDI is being sent to. Okay, so with Richard 77 about recording your multi-channel outputs of Groove Agent 4, you could have each agent will be like MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel 2, MIDI channel 3, MIDI channel 4. So you could have 4 distinct tracks that you could record on simultaneously, or if you wanted to actually have, if you wanted to get to the point also where if you wanted to put them to MIDI channel all, and then you could split out the different MIDI channels there as well. So I see a question also now regarding the control room while we're here. Okay, so there's a question from Raduku. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. About how to physically send from to the individual headphones. So if your audio interface has a headphone output, sometimes the audio interface, they can be kind of separate, individually assigned to the different headphone outputs. You could do that, or you could take line outputs from your audio interface and feed it into a headphone amp. I think PreSonus makes some, Behringer makes some, a number of different companies make different headphone amps. I think Samson has one that some people like. But you just need to, you may need to check the, a stereo output into like a headphone distribution system. And there's a number of pieces of hardware to do that. And again, a lot of different audio interfaces will have a couple. Okay, and if you have your UR824, we showed this just a little while, it may have been before you got logged on, but we could just come right over here, and this would be, I'm using the UR44. So if I come over here and you would see your audio hardware setup, and you click on the headphones, and this is if you have one of the UR or the MR audio interfaces, and MR are the FireWire versions, and UR are the USB. So you can think like USB recording UR. So here you could say where you want, like this would be mix 1 of your headphones, and this would be mix 2. So that's where you could set. So on my MR interfaces, which is what I use in my studio, I have these set up to go into different headphone distribution amps. And then if I need to do more headphone mixes, I have outputs 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 connected to other ones, so I could have 4 individual Q mixes. But this way you could do the routing of the Q mixes directly to the hardware. And again, that's right from your devices menu to your audio hardware setup. All right. So I'm going to circle back real quick, see if we have quick questions that I've missed here. Seen some more people logging on. Okay, that's great. All right, so we'll move on with okay, just reading back through some of the comments here. Okay, of how to route the room correction software in the control room. Again, if you wanted to just come directly here to your monitors. So once you have your monitor selected, this is for okay, so if you want to do like room correction, again, so select the headphone, go to your setup, and then this would be for the monitor that's currently selected here, and then just choose your plugin. So you could choose your room correction plugin directly there. So you could have up to 8 different insert effects per monitoring path, if you will. Okay, so we have a quick question from Don Smith about hooking up a pedal to a keyboard controller. So it kind of depends, so a lot of MIDI controllers will have like pedal inputs. The most common one that you would see is for sustain. So a lot of times, you could take your sustain pedal and kind of route it to other options as well, which we'll get into in one of the upcoming questions. But depending on the MIDI controller, some of them will have more pedal capabilities. If it's kind of a dedicated, many of the piano controllers will have kind of the 3 pedals for the piano. Often you might have a couple of assignable controllers, like you might be able to have like an expression pedal that transmits MIDI through that. So it's really kind of, it's often a 1/4-inch connector that goes directly into the back of your MIDI controller. So depending on your MIDI controllers, not all of them will have pedal inputs. Especially, I've seen some that are like 25 keys, or they're probably figuring out you're not playing a lot of piano stuff, maybe on a 2-octave controller. But you would be able to just see the 1/4-inch connector, and you would see just like a pedal 1, 2, or 3, depending on the controller that you'd connect it to. And then once that is connected, it should be able to transmit as long as your MIDI controller is transmitting. Now, one thing that could be a little weird is there could be kind of different, I believe the term would be polarity or kind of direction. So if it seems like the pedal is behaving opposite of what you'd expect, I believe kind of the classic one is a Yamaha pedal doesn't work in a Roland keyboard. It kind of works the opposite way, and a Roland pedal works opposite in a Yamaha keyboard. So what is off in one is on in the other. So at that point, you might have a pedal, and I think I have like an old M Audio pedal that has a little switch. So if it's kind of reversed, you just kind of flip the switch. But as long as your MIDI controller, Don, has a actual connection, and it's often like a 1/4-inch, like very similar to a guitar cable, and that pedal should be connected to your USB controller. If that's communicating to your computer, you should be all set. So it's a pretty straightforward connection. All right, so go back to some of the questions that were sent in. We'll go to our next question. All right, so we had the next question was going to be is about setting up like a control surface for using quick controls inside of Cubase. So with Cubase, you're going to have a number of quick controls. So if I come over here and if I load up a particular, we'll do a new project here. I'll just do a quick empty project. So I'll just add a mono track. So if you come here, you could have different quick controls. And these could be pretty handy. And one of the things that was really handy with the Cubase 7.5 is you can now actually have presets for quick controls. So you could have, if you kind of click right here on the quick controls, they kind of give you, okay, if I want to do my EQs, if I want to have all of my sends, you could just kind of click right here. Now, quick controls are set up so you can have kind of like 8 go-to like parameters. So if I wanted to add a soft synth, let's say like something like a Hallian Sonic SE that comes with directly with Cubase. So now if I add a Hallian Sonic SE, there's going to be a preset loaded up, and this will open up the 8 quick controls. So if I look at my quick controls here, these will be kind of the most relevant factors. Now, if I have a MIDI controller here, and if you wanted to assign your MIDI controller to quickly control these quick controls, all you'd have to do is go to your device setup, and then you could actually have, track quick controls or like, different VST quick controls. At this point, you could just say, okay, I wanted to learn. So let's say, I'll just kind of randomly assign this. We'll start with, say. Now, what you often need to do is to actually have an idea of what MIDI message, because when you move a knob on a controller, that MIDI message it's going to transmit a MIDI CC. So that's often called a MIDI continuous controller message. So I'll just kind of reset these, and I'm going to reassign them. Now, a lot of times, you don't want to necessarily read through the MIDI implementation chart to figure out what exact MIDI message that knob is actually transmitting. So if I click on the Learn button here, and I move a particular parameter, you can now just simply assign. So now that's assigned to controller 40 when I move the slider. So I'm going to move the slider again, another slider, and that's automatically captured that MIDI controller. So now these MIDI controllers I could learn, and then as I would select my different channels here, if I did everything correctly, you can just have control over your quick controls directly here. So this way you could assign kind of like 8 handy knobs, and we had a series of controllers, and one was called a CMC QC, and that was a quick control, and that was just 8 knobs that would allow you to kind of actually sit here and learn all these different controllers, so that you could always have kind of 8 knobs that were handy, so you could have complete control over all of your kind of go-to parameters. So with most control surfaces, I believe the question was specifically with the Avid artist, most of the times they're just kind of communicating, spitting out MIDI messages over different MIDI, and and it could be over different communication protocols. I believe that's an Ethernet-based controller. Just assign that quick control, and then those will kind of stick for your different options right there. So that's a great way of kind of using 8 sets of control knobs to control a lot of relevant parameters for you. Okay, so we'll circle back to one of the questions for Raduku about recording clean with the DSP effects, but monitoring with a guitar signal. We covered this a little earlier. You might have logged on a little bit after. But if I go once again to my mix console, we want to make sure that we see our input channels, and we're going to define input channels. So if I wanted to come here, if I click on the correct button this time, we go to our VST connections. I'm going to go to my input, and let's say I have my guitar connected into input 3. And then I go to my hardware tab. So make sure that in the racks that the hardware is turned on. And we'll just review this for the people that saw it a little earlier. You'll see the hardware section. And then right now we don't see, if we kind of follow the signal flow, we see no insert effect. We have 3 positions, the top, the middle, and the bottom. So in the middle, this will allow you to monitor the guitar sound, but record a clean signal into Cubase. If you wanted to record a unprocessed sound, so we can monitor this and record an unprocessed sound, and we kind of see the signal flow here. If I move this down, we now record the sound of the guitar amp on the input channel. So we basically apply the effect in this position. In the middle position, we monitor with the effect. And the top position, there's no insert effects there. So but we did cover that a little bit. So if you came in a little bit late, that's just a quick recap on that. All right, I'm going to cycle back to some of the questions that were sent in earlier. I think we got a couple more. All right, so someone who watched the tutorial video I did on the track versions in Cubase, and they were wondering how I did kind of routing of the track versions. Because what we did is record the outputs of the VST instruments directly as audio. So if I wanted to come here, we'll just activate this project. And let me just come right here, and we'll just kind of revert this. Actually activated the wrong project. All right, and they'll just revert this here real quick so we can start from square one. All right, so the concept was, okay, I have like a VST instrument, and they specifically mentioned Groove Agent, and they wanted to record the outputs, like each pad, onto a separate audio track at once. And I have this kind of set up. And there's two ways of doing this. One, and there's kind of like an internal routing mechanism. So if I wanted to, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to select 16 tracks here, and I'm going to move these into a folder track. So I'm going to right click and say move selected tracks to new folder. And one of the things that's really helpful if you're doing like a live recording and you don't want to sit here and arm every single track, if you place them all into a folder and arm and record the folder, that will carry over for all the tracks within. Now, Groove Agent SE can have 16 stereo outputs, and sometimes this could be a little subtle of where the output routing is. So if I select the pad, I can see my output right here. If we go to Edit, to Main, and then in the lower left-hand corner, you could see all of your outputs. Now, one of the things that you want to do to make sure is if you have the Groove Agent active here, we could go to your VST instrument rack, and one of the first things that you probably want to do is if you come here is to activate all the outputs. By default, Cubase will give you a stereo output. So again, to do that, you could just kind of click directly here, and you'll see like all of your outputs. Now, one of the things that had changed with Cubase 7.5 was kind of a consolidation. It used to be we had instrument tracks and instruments in the instrument rack. So the instrument tracks were a little faster, but it didn't have multiple outputs, and it wasn't multi-timbral. So we only had a stereo output and one MIDI channel. So if we had an instrument like the Halion Sonic SE that can have 16 MIDI channels simultaneously, we could only have one channel per instance of that instrument. So with Cubase 7.5, it was kind of consolidated, and that's why we kind of see this window where we could have all of our VST instruments and our VST instrument racks kind of all within the same kind of window here. So as we kind of work with this, that limitation, if I wanted to go here, we could just choose to see your outputs for, a particular channel, and I have this kind of hidden from view. So I'm going to go to my visibility, and we'll take a look at my Groove Agent. So when I go to my Groove Agent, at that point, you could choose to activate all the outputs. You'll see a little icon kind of like this. So what I've done and the question was they wanted to be able to kind of take their project here, or take the pattern, the audio. So let's say we kind of play this, and I'm just going to record this directly as audio. So basically each of the pads here from the instrument pad are actually outputting audio directly into so each output here is sending the audio into an audio input. So how we accomplish this, there's two different methods. One is we could kind of set up, if we go to our VST connections, you can set up phantom outputs or phantom groups. So I've created 16 stereo groups here. And I actually don't have them routed anywhere. So, and I've come in here and I've assigned each of the pads to a different output. So when I click on a pad, I could choose this will be out of the master output. This will be out of output 2, output 3, 4, 8, 12, 16. So each of these pads will be routed to a distinct output. Now, when I go into my mixer, and we'll just show all of the tracks. So we go into our mixer. I can see that we're going to have the outputs here from Groove Agent routed to our different groups. So if I open up Groove Agent here and hit the pad, let me just close this so we can probably see this a little better. I can see that the output is now from in the Cubase mixer being routed to group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, etc. So as I hit my different pads here, you can see that they're routed to different groups. Now, this could be with outputs or with groups. And again, they don't have to be physically assigned to I/O. And at that point, I routed these to groups. When I come here to my input of these various channels, I choose the group as the input. So this way, when the audio is generated by the virtual instrument in real time, it's routed to a group. That group is in turn routed to the input of this particular channel. So at that point, as we hit play, it's going to be generating the audio as well. Now this is really handy sometimes if you have I'm not a good keyboard player. Keyboard isn't my primary instrument. But if I have someone that's a really good player, I may want to actually record the audio with the MIDI simultaneously. So I could actually take the output of the virtual instrument, route it to a group, take an audio track, route that group as an input to an audio channel, and then record the MIDI and record the audio simultaneously, which is really, really handy. So again, just kind of taking the outputs from the particular instrument. So we're going to make sure that all the outputs are active. Take the pads from Groove Agent or any VST instrument, your sampler, whatever. Make sure that we have the outputs assigned. In the mixer, take those outputs and again route them from the instrument outputs to our groups. So as I do this, we can see kind of the signal flow kind of progress. And then take those groups as inputs directly on an audio channel and hit record. And what's great about it is you can do it once and kind of set it up as a template. So you don't have to do a very complex routing. So again, you could set up kind of phantom groups or phantom outputs, and then just kind of internally route the audio signal back into the program as well. So. All right, so seeing a couple more questions. Let me kind of circle back. All right, glad you could join us, Carlos from Texas. All right, so I'm seeing where in a preference do you make the program inactive in the computer position? I'm not sure if I understand that question from Robert. So where in preferences do I make the program inactive when in a drop-down position? So maybe if you could rephrase that question, maybe I'm kind of being dense about it, not understanding. But maybe if you could, or if someone else could comment. I'm seeing a couple things on Windows Paint or. Okay, and we have another question here about, looks like sample rate and bit depth. Let me read it. It's how do I change 48K 32-bit to 44.1 24-bit every time I do it? Nothing sounds the same. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Okay, so as you record audio into Cubase, the bit depth and the sample rate could be determined, by your project setup. So if you go to your project menu and then go to project setup, here you can kind of choose the default 24-bit. Like in my system, I would set for 24-bit, 44.1. I could go up to, 192K directly here. It always helps if your audio interface supports it, like my UR44 does. And you could, do 16-bit, 24-bit, or 32-bit float. Now, so if you record, or if you're bringing in different files that are different, different bit depths or different sample rates, one of the things that you could do is actually, if you go into your pool window, so under media, and you'll see the pool window here, you could actually select all of your files, and again, select the top file, hold down the shift key, select the bottom file, and if you right click, I believe it's in here, convert files. So at this point I could say, okay, we're at we'll kind of see, okay, we're at 24-bit 44.1. So I could say we want to convert these to 48K, and I want these to be 16-bit. And we could keep the channel width, and if I wanted to change it from a broadcast wave to a FLAC or a standard wave, we could do that. So, and then you could have it create new files or replace the file. So I'm just going to go ahead and, for this example, I'll say let's replace the file. So what it's going to do is actually convert this. So as soon as I do this, it's now taking each of the files, and now it's a 16-bit 48K file. You could do that. Now, there's another preference to be aware of. So if you wanted to, if you find yourself getting, files from different bit depths that you don't have set up for by default, and I've seen, like amazing engineers actually do mixes of files at the wrong sample rate and turn it into the record company and have it get accepted, only to have the artist say, oh, it's a little slow. So it happens to the best people. But if you go here to the preferences, you can go to, I believe it's going to be editing audio. So if you come here, you can say, open options dialog. So as you import audio file, you could also just have it automatically convert. You can have it copy directly into the project file folder, so to kind of keep all the files. But you could also check to have it convert and copy to convert to the project. So if you get an audio file that's at a different bit depth or sample rate, you could just simply have that automatically convert, and that way, there's always the possibility of, it sounding a little different as the audio file goes through, any conversion stage. But, for the most part, we haven't really had any complaints from, our top producers and mix artists that have been doing it inside of Cubase. But that's a pretty easy way to have it automatically just kind of convert to your project tempo, or you could change it in the project setup and kind of work at the actual native sample rate as well. So I hope that makes sense for the file conversion. I'm going to circle back here just a minute, see if we have other questions. We have a couple more that were sent in advance. Again, if you have more comments or more questions, please feel free to kind of ask them. Okay, so I guess Robert kind of reiterated your question. So deactivated the software to use a different program. So if I wanted to use a different program, I could just Alt-Tab, and like if I want to look at my Chrome browser, I could do that. Now, if your different program uses your audio interface, and you want it to release the audio interface in the background, if you go to your devices menu, to device setup, you could just simply come here, and I believe if you check the VST audio system right here under your ASIO driver, you have a little checkbox that you can say release driver when application is in background. So if another program needs to use your audio interface, that should allow you to kind of communicate, depending on if the driver is a multi-client driver as well. So, sometimes, Cubase can use it as an ASIO device, and other programs can use it as like a Windows or a standard core audio driver on Mac. It's probably more on the Windows front that this kind of creeps up. But I think that kind of answers it. But if it doesn't, Robert, just kind of let me know. But I think that's kind of what you're asking, but I just want to make sure we get your point kind of answered. Okay, we'll go back to one of the questions that was sent in. All right, so we had someone who had a pretty elaborate mix done, and they wanted to take the automation on all the tracks and actually drop it a little bit in automation. So we'll take a look at how to do that. So let me just open up in our project here. All right, and I'm just going to go to my control room. I think I probably have it routed to somewhere. I'm not. This can happen to you, the best of us, where we could actually have, now I want to listen to the mix, and now. So let's say if I'm here and I was writing automation, I'll open up my mix console. I'm going to select all the tracks here. Let's say these 7 tracks or so. I'm going to enable write automation. So if I wanted to actually physically automate something, you can now just click on the W button, and that writes or records the automation and read. The R is read and plays back the automation. So I think a W is for recording the automation and the R for playback. So write and read automation. So we have, and I'm just going to place these into a quick Q link here. So let's say if I'm playing back my project, we'll just kind of jump here.
All right, go ahead. Turning Japanese.
And I'm just have these linked here with my quick link.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And so I just had some fake automation kind of going on here. Turn the click off. So I'm just going to write some kind of really bad automation data. All right, so we've written some automation. Now, if I want to see my automation, one of the things that's handy is you could actually open up your automation panel right here. So you see kind of different automation settings, but there's a panel. And if I wanted to, hide all of my automation or show only used automation, so I could see kind of my automation laid out for me. Now, there's a couple ways, and a lot of engineers really love Cubase for the fact that you could have, if I wanted to boost a track or cut a track here, I could actually do this before the signal hits the channel. So if you wanted to kind of boost stuff, or you could even come right over here and draw in, if you just select the pencil tool, and you could draw in volume changes. And these are kind of before it hits the channel. So sometimes a lot of engineers would regulate kind of all of their volume changes here and then kind of use the compressor for, doing little fixes, but, not using it for kind of makeup gain. So that's something that's very easy. But the question we ran into, and this is at our Club Cubase in New York a couple weeks ago, was they just wanted to take this exact automation here and take all the tracks and be able to kind of lower it. So if we come here, we open up the automation panel. There's some really handy features in here. One of the things is you have different automation fill modes. So if I wanted to, write automation, and let's say I'm in measure 16 by the time I get to a particular track, if I have to start activated, whatever value I set here will kind of be written in to the beginning of the track, even if I don't catch it at the very beginning. Now there's also a mode here called trim. So I'm going to use a combination of to start, to end, and trim. So as we come here, now I'm just going to select, we'll make sure that I'm still linked. Okay, so we're linked. And I'm going to now activate to start, to end, and trim. So now we'll do our automation pass. So now we'll do it from our mix console here. So now as I adjust it and then turn trim off, if I had moved the faders down a little bit or up, all of the automation would then be kind of raised or lowered. So we'll see if we can do it from this page here. So come here, activate the trim. Then if I move down, stop, and then turn trim off, it'll then just kind of change those automation values. So that way you can kind of maintain your automation curves, but be able to kind of, increase it by, 1 dB or 2 dB, or just kind of drop it down. Another method to do it is if you have, especially if you're doing it for one track, it could be pretty easy because you could select all of your automation data here. And you could do this for multiple tracks, but you might have to open up and kind of physically select all of your automation data here. But as soon as you do that, you could actually just kind of set, the automation values here and adjust your value with kind of using your scroll wheel. So that comes in handy as well. So if you're kind of doing a one track, but if you have 100 tracks in your mix, doing the to start and to end and go into trim mode, kind of just touch the fader up or down in the direction that you want the automation to go. And at that point, be able, and then hit the trim button again, and then it will automatically kind of correlate and drop all the volume levels up or down, depending how you moved the fader. So it's kind of a handy trick if you get stuck in a situation and everything is starting to creep up in volume and get a little too loud. So, all right. So, I think we had a couple of our questions. Let me just kind of cycle back. Is everyone learning a couple things? All right, so we had a question about taking like a mono track into stereo, or probably stereo into mono as well. So it could be, Nuendo has a kind of a slicker implementation of this, but let me just really quickly hide all of my automation. And let's say I have a stereo file here. One way of doing it is to is actually just kind of an offline bounce. So if I wanted to come here, I could just say, let's hit, you want to set the left and right locators for the particular selection. So if I wanted to do just a range, I could do that and then hit the letter P, and this will automatically set the left and right locators. Or if you have parts selected, you could just select a part and then hit the letter P. So at this point, if I wanted to take this stereo file, turn it into two monos, I could just come right here. If I wanted to solo that particular track, and we could choose to do a file, and then we'll go to export audio mix down. And one of the options that you'll have here is to split channels. So I'm going to import this directly back into our audio track. And at this point, we could just say export. So it's going to create a audio track of just this one particular track, or reverb return here. And it's going to generate that as 2 mono files. Now it's going to import that directly into our project. I may have done just check my audio bounce my file settings here. I'll try this one more time, but I think we're at 44. Doesn't seem to be cooperating, but basically you just kind of do an export audio mix down. So you could take your mono file directly to stereo, your stereo files directly to mono as well. So it's very, very kind of, it's not the most intuitive way of doing it. Nuendo has a convert option directly on a project window that's not in Cubase. Maybe we'll see it in the future, but you could just kind of do the offline processing with that. All right, we're going to circle back, see if we had other questions. And if you have other quick questions, I'm just going to cycle back to the beginning of the threads here and see if I missed anything. We could do a little Groove Agent 4 if we have some more time. We have a little bit of time left over. Okay, so we have a question about from Greg McCarty about MIDI tracks not being incorporated into the QSends. So if I added a VST instrument, let's say, so now I come here, let's say a Groove Agent. I'll just go ahead and my Cubase acted up. Sorry about that. I have so many background tasks going on to make the Google Hangouts happen here. Sorry about that. So I believe that the audio routing for the Q mixes would work the same way. Well, I'll just check it just to make sure here. So I believe that you can do the routing of the audio for the Q mixes. I'm just going to get rebooted here. So if I wanted to, let me just go to new project here. Let me just go where I have a combination. So when you go to your QSends here, it's really set up you need to do it from the audio part as opposed to the MIDI track. But if it's a virtual instrument or an external instrument, you could actually at that point, just take the audio characteristic here and be able to do the routing into the QMix just like anything else. So these different drum tracks, the VST, so these are the MIDI tracks, but the virtual studio outputs are handled the same way in the QMix. We also had a question when I just remembered, I'm not sure if I had it in my notes, but someone had asked about using external effects processors in conjunction with their Cubase. So if you wanted to do that, like if you had a favorite outboard compressor or maybe a high-end reverb that you wanted to actually, to incorporate, again, we could use the available inputs and outputs of our audio interface. And we go to our VST connections, and we see a tab here called External Effects. So if I had, let's say, a Bricasti reverb, I wish I had one, I could connect it into available inputs and outputs of my audio interface here. So whether it's a digital connection or whether it's a analog connection, mono, stereo, 5.1, any kind of surround configuration. So now if I wanted to go into that, I could actually now just go directly here and incorporate it as a plugin. So, and they show up under external effects. So if you say, okay, I want to go to my Bricasti or I have my LA2A. Now, as you do this, one of the things that's really very handy is the ability to actually have this delay compensated. So we kind of know what the delay going in and out of the audio driver, the audio interface is itself. Because we could calculate that, and that's kind of a known entity. But if you have like a reverb unit, or you might have additional latencies imposed by the converters of that reverb unit. So if you actually come here, as soon as you instantiate a external effect, you see this little ping button. So you'd click on that ping button, and that measures the latency of the signal path of the external effects processors. And at that point, it's just automatically compensated for. So you could use your external processing, very similar to how you could use just a normal plugin, but it's just kind of, again, going through the inputs and outputs and the physical connections of your audio interface. So a lot of guys that use a lot of external outboard gear will like to have a number of inputs and outputs, and they could just I see this a lot with like MADI systems where you may have 64 channels of I/O, and a lot of the I/O isn't for tracking; it's for using external processing. And again, having this fully delay compensated, so you could use your favorite. At this point, you can say, okay, I wanted to go into my VST dynamics, into my LA2A, and then into my Magneto plugin. So I could just kind of pop right over here, and if you wanted to change the order, you could use your external effects processors, virtually the same way, the same kind of routing capabilities as you can your software plugins, so you kind of have the best of both worlds, and again, with the true latency compensation of the system as well. Okay, so we had a question from Jimmy about saving like the mixer settings of we could do track presets, as Jimmy mentioned. So if I wanted to come here, you can just, if I like how this particular track is set up, I could save that as a track preset. So if you go to the mix console, you can now come right over here, and if you wanted to, just kind of in the upper right-hand corner, you could select all the channels. So if I wanted to save a particular mix, I'll just open up kind of a larger project here. All right, so I'll activate this project. And this could come in handy in a lot of different ways, like if you're working on a I actually got this question from Peter Frampton last week. Called, had a bunch of live recordings that he wanted to kind of compile and have kind of consistency once he had everything kind of dialed up. But I could select kind of all my channels here, and like this project is, I think about 119 tracks or so. So if we want to go, I could select all my channels, and in the upper right hand corner, if you wanted to save all the mixer settings, at this point you could just say save the selected channels right there, and I will save it as a preset. So if you wanted to take different stabs at mixes or processes, or like I'm always working with this particular live recording, and this is kind of my preset template to kind of start. This is how I want all the mixers to be set up, line up all the tracks. And then you could load the selected channels directly there, and that saves it as a VMX file. If you had an early version, it had disappeared in one version, I think 701. It disappeared and then came back in 702. I'm not sure what the story was. It was in 7.0, but 701, it disappeared and came back. So, but just go to the upper right-hand corner and then just say save the selected channels, and then you could import or just load those selected channels, and those settings will kind of be carried directly over. All right, let me cycle back, see if there's other questions. All right, so I see a question from Don about in the project, and you can delete the instrument, but you're not seeing the toggle to remove the instrument. I assume this is from the instrument rack itself. So if you wanted to come here, we could say, if we open up your VST instrument rack, so here I have just everything in Hallian in this project. So if we wanted to, all you have to do is just select no VST instrument, and that will remove that from your particular your instrument rack. So you have to kind of select no VST instrument, and that will remove it, or you could just assign it to other instruments as well. All right, any more questions that come in? We have a couple minutes. We have about 20 minutes if you wanted to do kind of a Groove Agent 4 overview. I think Don had asked if I was kind of just from memory. We could do kind of a quick overview of that. I know we've covered it a couple times, but anything that you guys wanted to see, we'd be happy to kind of go over that. We'll see if there's any more questions, and we'll touch on a little bit of Groove Agent 4 for, I believe, Don's benefit. You'd asked about it. I'm just going to go through my questions document and see if there's any other questions that I missed from there that people had sent in. I see a lot of, sorry about hitting the microphone with my headphones. I see a lot of discussion on Windows Paint. I'm not sure what that's about. So if I'm missing, if you have a question about that with kind of Windows, you can kind of feel free to ask. See if there's any more questions, and we'll do a little bit on Groove Agent 4 for a couple minutes. Just wait, see if we have anything else kind of coming in, questions. We're going to be doing, we had some requests earlier for a dedicated Hallian 5 Google Hangout, kind of an in-depth. So we just scheduled that for Monday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. So if you wanted to see kind of, we'll go through Hallian in depth, like kind of, importing different sample libraries and getting routing, making your own sounds, all the different instruments, kind of starting with the synthesis, all that good stuff. So, and then we'll do another November Google Hangout that's kind of be for general Q&A. All right, seeing a couple more questions. All right, so I'm seeing a question from Oral in Jamaica. It's great to have you on. But one of the things that, so Cubase doesn't actually record video, but what you can do is import the video file itself. But Cubase doesn't record. Most people, kind of using their digital audio workstation, will just kind of import the video and kind of add all the music to that. So Cubase isn't a video recorder. Thanks for joining the group from Jamaica. I think it's the first time we've had someone from the Caribbean live. Yep, so we'll do a kind of a detailed Hallian 5. Okay, we'll see if there are any other questions. If not, we'll touch on some Groove Agent stuff. Groove Agent 4, a quick overview of that. I'll wait just another minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started on a little bit of Groove Agent. Yeah, and if you guys have been wanting to kind of check out Hallian, you could always get the trial version, and you can play with it for 30 days. And that, you'll have it all the way through the next Google Hangout and kind of get up to speed. It's an incredibly deep program. It's pretty amazing what it could do. So we'll wait a minute here, see if you guys have any other questions. If not, we'll just touch on a quick overview. I know we've done it in a couple other Google Hangout sessions, but we'll do it. And again, these sessions are really for you guys. Any questions that you have that you run into, stuff that you want to understand better, you can leave comments on the channel, like on this page or the other Google Hangouts. That'll get to me, or send messages. If you go to youtube.com/clubcubase, you can just kind of send messages for future topics as well. We'll do a Hallian 5 in November, plus a regular general kind of Q&A. All right, so I'll wait just a minute, and we'll do a little Groove Agent 4. Okay, so with Groove Agent 4, we wanted to come up with a drum program that covered a lot of different bases, because many programs actually, run into different, specialize in different areas. So you have some drum programs are really good for acoustic, and some that are really good for electronic and dance. But what we want to do is kind of achieve a lot of different elements directly inside of Groove Agent. So we have, 4 different agents, and these each will be different MIDI channels. So MIDI channel 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if I wanted to just kind of play, we could start off, and let me make sure I have my control room set up here correctly. And just check my connections. I may have. All right, so we'll go ahead and just kind of play a little bit of the acoustic agent. You should probably hear it now. Now, one of the things that's really cool is, when you have your different acoustic, you have 3 different drum kits. There's a studio kit, a vintage kit, as well as a rock kit. Now, every time that you select a particular drum here, we could have 16 pads per bank. We could have 8 banks, and we could have instrument pads or pattern pads. So with the pattern pads, with the acoustic agent, you could have all sorts of, like, 4 intros, 4 different endings, as well as 8 drum fills, and 8 regular patterns. Now, what's kind of cool is how you can change the sound. So if I select my bass drum here, I could say I want to add more room. I'll turn this up a little bit so you can hear. So if I want to tune the snare, or take the snare more in the room, or if I want to switch like different patterns here, I could select the hi-hat. So very, very easy to kind of dial in. So whatever you kind of click on, you have kind of custom context-sensitive controls for each of those drums. Now what's really interesting is we could load up kind of by right-clicking different patterns. So if I wanted to go to my acoustic agent and say, okay, I want something a little more funky. And then I could go to my pattern editor. And once I have these 8 patterns here, what's kind of cool is each of them can have their own halftime feel as well, but you have 16 levels of complexity. So if I want something very simple and basic, or more complex, or you have different levels of intensity, which is, think of it as volume. So if you want something very intense and soft, or loud and simple, or somewhere in the middle. And these could all be assigned to different remote controllers. So if you want to just learn your CC, you could just assign it to your MIDI controller. And if you really like that pattern, you could just drag it directly onto your timeline. But you could actually just kind of hit play and have that automatically synchronize. Now, the mixing is also incredibly flexible in that when I click on the mixer, for every single element, I could have 4 bands of parametric EQ, compression, tape saturation, as well as envelope shaper. So kind of like your transient designer. So if I wanted to even come here, you could have different aux sends. So if I wanted more reverb, and you have 29 different plugins. So now if I wanted to go back to my agent mixer, I have 4 different aux sends. But if I wanted just more tape saturation on my kick, so kind of whatever you have selected. So I could have groups where I could have all my snares. And if I wanted to just listen to like the room mics and the overheads and the kick for more organic sound, or to bring it into direct microphones. But you could also have individual kicks, snares, toms, cymbals, kind of all working together here as well. So, very easy to kind of just hit play and have it be something, musical. So if I wanted to, you could now also, if I want to do more electronic stuff, we could look at Beat Agent. And what's kind of cool about Beat Agent is they did a lot of things to make it very authentic. So if I wanted to just have this particular pattern play, I could switch all the drums to playback in different playback engines. So I'm going to select all the pads here, and I can say let's have it play back in 12-bit vintage mode, or where we sampled like a 33 LP at 45 RPM and slowed it down. We could put it in turntable mode to save on sampling space, kind of old school trick. Now I could do a tremendous amount of editing. So if I want to take just a kick here, I could make the kick louder, softer. So whatever is selected here. And if I wanted to go to my pitch, I could just say, okay, let's just do a pitch envelope just on a kick. Or if I want to take the hi-hat here, and we'll make the hi-hat louder. But I wanted to go to my pitch and randomize the pitch of the hi-hat. Or if you wanted to apply filters on each of these as well, you could now just apply 6 different filter types on an individual pad or all the selected pads. And if I wanted to add MIDI effects to one particular instrument, I could select my snare. If I want to add like rudiments, like flams, drags, or even like MIDI delays. So let's say I want the pitch to go up. And for the pattern pads, you could also just come right here and actually edit your own pattern. So if I wanted to play a particular pattern, adjust the velocity. So you have kind of your own MIDI Cubase drum editor kind of built right in. Now the other thing that's kind of interesting is the concept of a percussion agent. So while it does like acoustic stuff super well, it's also going to do electronic stuff incredibly well, but there's also the percussion agent. And so as soon as I open this up, and we'll see kind of some similar paradigms in the percussion agent that we do in with our, so let's say we'll just come here, we'll just make this a little louder so you hear. So when we go to the mixer, we'll see kind of a very similar mixer concept where each percussion instrument could have, again, the 4 bands of EQ, the compression, tape saturation, and the envelope shaper. So that's every single element here. So you have 4 different banks. Now when we look at a percussion instrument, and we edit the instrument itself, you could have basically every single instrument. So you have like this conga, but 5 different articulations of that conga, or different cowbells, or so. And again, each of these has their own context-sensitive menu. So what's kind of cool about this, if I wanted to make my own patterns, I can now just go to my pattern editor, and you could actually select kind of different elements here. So we'll start off with maybe one pattern. So we'll activate this. And let's say we want this to be bongo. And you have 5 levels of complexity. So if you want it to be different levels of intensity. So if you want it to be kind of not as active rhythmically, or more active, and I could just again bring in, so say I want this cabasa, but I could actually have this cabasa be in double time or half time. So you could kind of bring in, so say we want shakers, we'll try that double time, and we'll adjust the intensity here. And let's say I want it what's interesting is you could also just have this be completely random. So that the complexities will be random, and you could also have kind of different offsets for each of the percussion components. So where it could be really interesting is combining these different things. And there's also like really cool stuff like different like marching band percussion or orchestral percussions. So if I wanted to come here, now we could actually just sequence all these different patterns. So if I wanted to just take this one pattern here, and we could set up your patterns, and these will respond to different MIDI notes. So let's say, for instance, in this pattern, I could actually just start off with my acoustic drums. And we could actually have kind of a pattern overview. So each agent, you could have 16 patterns, and you can mix and match any pattern with any other pattern. So this pattern here, the first one of this bank of 16, I could have just my drums. And if I click here, this would bring in my second agent, my percussion agent. So just doing that. So now if I go to my mixer and go to my kit mixer, I could actually adjust and let's say I wanted to bring in like an electronic element. And then at the same time, if I wanted to bring in like marching band, but I wanted a different pattern to be here instead. And if I change my tempo, so it all automatically just kind of lock. So if I wanted to actually just sequence these different patterns of patterns, if you will, I could just come here and just from a MIDI controller I have connected. And now I'll hit the next note. And I'll just take it, let me take it out of cycle mode. Sorry about that. All right, so we'll just put it in record. So we'll start off with just our acoustic agent. And now I'll hit A. And this will bring in the percussion. I'll take out cycle mode this time, sorry. So as I just hit one MIDI note that triggers this pad. And then you're able to kind of sequence all of your different events. So you have multiple agents all reacting in real time to your MIDI input. So instead of just having one tool that does acoustic drums, one tool that does electronic drums, one that does, one that does, percussion or different loops, you can just literally kind of drag and drop all these different elements in. So hope that's a quick overview, and there's kind of more detailed ones in some of the previous Hangouts. I see a question from Jimmy, is there a way to remove multiple VST instruments? If you have it set up as, and I'll try this real quick on just a new project here. I think if you have it set up as instrument tracks, that you could remove multiple ones, but I'll just check just to confirm. So I'll just add a couple of the synths here. So let's say loop mash. And as we do this, it's going to add the track with it. Let's try Mystic. If you haven't played around with these synths, there's some really cool stuff in here, especially this one's a really pretty phenomenal one, Pad Shop. If you haven't played with this, there's some pretty amazing sounds in here. So if I have these three loaded as instrument tracks, and I think if I now select them and then remove the selected tracks, they'll be removed from the instrument rack. But I don't think it works for rack instruments. So let's say if I come here, so if you have it as instrument tracks, you can remove them when the tracks are removed from the project window, but not with the instrument, not with the rack instruments. Question was, can you use regular loops in Loop Mash? Sure, no problem at all. So if you wanted to, all you have to do, we'll just take a quick look at this. So if you have Loop Mash, And let's say I have like my media bay open, you could just drag and drop any of your audio directly into Loop Mesh from Finder, from your Cubase project window, from Media Bay. So just fully drag and drop compatible. All right, we're just about out of time. Let's see if there's any just real quick last minute questions. I'd like to thank you guys for all kind of checking it out. I hope everyone learned a thing. Did everyone find it useful? And again, if you have future topics that you want to go over, again, November 3rd will be kind of a Halion 5 in-depth. So if you wanted to kind of check that out and see what it's like, it's a pretty amazingly powerful tool. It's really kind of one instrument that could do, just about all of your needs. So it's pretty powerful. And then later in November, maybe, around the week of the 16th, we'll try to do another kind of general Q&A hangout as well. We'll see if there's any last minute questions that kind of creep in. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye for the night. Like to thank everyone for participating. If you have comments or just want to be able to, have future questions, please feel free to kind of just ask them. And hopefully everyone's finding this way of seeing some stuff in action. It's hard for us to travel to every city, so hopefully this is kind of a good way where you could actually kind of get a sense of what's going on and be able to see what's going on with some of the Steinberg stuff. We'll just wait in our minutes, see if we have more questions. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I'd like to thank you guys for hanging out. And again, let me know if, questions or future topics you want covered. We'll hang out just for another minute. All right, well, we'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming to the Hangout, and we'll see you next time.